Africa. She was Alkebulan, the mother of mankind, cradle of civilization, the heartbeat of creation itself. Now her children return, calling her name again. Say Alkebulan, Alkebulan, the mother of life, the mother of life, where the sun first shines, where the sun first shines. Rise again, Alkebulan, rise again, Alkebulan. Hey! Oh, Alkebulan, Alkebulan, Alkebulan. Home. Your children are calling, we're coming home. Oh, Alkebulan, the world must know you gave birth to the light, let your glory show. They changed your name to hide your fame. They broke the chains but kept the game. Divided your children with borders and lies, but truth never dies, it only multiplies. We are the sons and daughters of your soil, still rising strong from the years of toil. They took our name, but not our soul. Alkebulan still makes the broken whole. Say Alkebulan, Alkebulan, the mother of life, the mother of life, where the sun first shines, where the sun first shines. Rise again, Alkebulan, rise again, Alkebulan. Oh, Alkebulan, cradle divine, mother of kings.
Okay. Greetings, everybody. Greetings. Welcome.
A mix or something? What was that? Go on, sorry.
Okay, greetings, everybody. Welcome to another Alkebulan Awakening series in collaboration with Kumbukeni. As always, guys, my name is Oladile Dosumum. I'm the founder of the Emerging Alkebulan. And you all know, for those who follow us, you know what we do on this platform is about decolonizing our minds and awakening our consciousness. Just letting us know that the Muzungu way, the Oyinbo way, will never free we Africans. We need to basically find our own way. We have our own ways. We have our own ancestral indigenous knowledge systems. Let's go back to basics. Unduku.
Yeah. I was saying to a friend the other day who doesn't understand why I am rejecting Marxism. They're like, when they listen to me talk, they hear me talk, and they're like, you're talking Marxism. I was like, yeah, I get that. But Marxism, the word Marxism is a Mzungu word, and our practices existed before Marx even dreamt of Marxism. So guess what? I ain't going to call what we're doing Marxism, because Marxism was born just yesterday. My grandma always said, who are you to think you can tell us what to do? We're going to call it what we called it before Marx even dreamt of Marxism. So I refuse to call what we do as Africans Marxism. I refuse to call it socialism. We will call it by our own languages because we have them. The name is Ndoko. I'm the host on Kumbukeni. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Okay, just let my guest introduce himself. David, if you want to introduce yourself to the people know, for Nigerians know you, but a lot of people don't know who you are. So if you don't mind introducing yourself, please.
Well, in my previous life, I was I was an investigative journalist, published author, best-selling published author, I might add, 2-time best-selling published author in Nigeria, and a pretty decent columnist, I guess. And what I said in my previous life was that sometime around 2023, I guess everyone that is on this kind of platform has a similar story where there's an event or this series of events that happens and kind of your entire perspective on the world just shifts 180 completely. And what happened in my case was in 2023, in the run-up to the Nigeria's 2023 election, where, well, to provide context for this, when I left the UK in 2013 to return to Nigeria, that was the Africa Rising time when we used to hear that phrase, Africa Rising. And it was rising for me. And then in 2015, an election happened in Nigeria, and a new president came in, and the country's trajectory just went, just fell off a cliff. And I spent the next 8 years being told different variations of, it's your fault, it's Nigerians' fault, you voted the wrong leader, you don't hold your leaders accountable, blah, 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 blah. So I did what I considered to be the ultimate act of holding leadership accountable in the run-up to 2023, where I basically did a deep dive into the history of the person who was being positioned to become the successor to that president that basically ruined my 20s, right? And I was able to establish using official records from the US that this guy used to be a drug dealer, and that this guy is very much not the sort of character that you want anywhere near the presidency of Africa's largest country. So, and then in addition to just doing the story, I went a step further, because in my head, I had been fed with so much of this narrative of, Africans need to take responsibility. The power is in your hands. It's all about, the reason things haven't gotten better is because Africans have been lazy. So it's all about you and your personal agency. So I was overdosed on personal agency. I sued 6 US government agencies in federal FOIA court in the US. I sued the FBI, the DEA, the IRS, the State Department, the CIA, and the US Attorney's Office to get records on this guy, because in my mind, once I can establish beyond any kind of reasonable doubts that this person is like this extremely unsavory criminal character, somehow this system is going to work, and I'm going to ensure that a corrupt leader doesn't get into power in Africa. And instead, what happened was the US court system made it very clear that they were going to do any kind of chicanery possible to protect this guy.
Yep.
And at first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. I had no frame of reference. I was completely confused, because bear in mind, I was very much still stuck in that mindset of somehow these Western guys somehow have benevolent aspirations for us, that somehow they want the best for us, and somehow the reason why things haven't been going well for us is because we've been stupid and we've been irresponsible and we've been malfeasant and we've not, played our role. So I thought, getting into using this Western system the way it's supposed to be used, I'm going to get this result, and I'm going to ensure that using this African agency of mine, this bad outcome is not going to happen, and I'm going to be part of the solution. And instead, they just protected this guy like in every kind of legal trick and chicanery that you might expect to find in an African courtroom. They did it. Again, I had no frame of reference for this. I didn't understand what I was looking at first. When it started to make sense to me was also in that year, in 2023, shortly after this guy became president, because despite all these efforts, he became president anyway. And they all sent congratulatory tweets. In fact, the very first head of state in the world to congratulate this person for becoming president, it wasn't even a fellow African head of state. It was the British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Right. So after all of that, within less than 2 months of becoming president, there was a coup in Niger, which was led by people who had a stated goal of carrying out a sort of anti-colonial revolution against French domination. Yeah. Now, relatively brainwashed as I was then, even then I still understood that the level of colonial influence of France was much, much more than sort of maybe the British colonial influence in Anglophone Africa. I understood, for example, that these guys don't have their own currency. The France-Africa agreement is very, very, these guys are not sovereign. So I kind of supported it in principle, even though I wasn't brave enough to say so at the time. And then all of a sudden, the Nigerian president, this new Nigerian president who I knew was a criminal and who, I've been trying to shout for the best part of 2 years, this guy's a drug dealer, this guy shouldn't be president. This guy's trying to deploy the Nigerian military into Niger, and he's being supported by these Western actors. And it was like in the space of a few days, because what then happened was someone in the military, in the chain of command, then reached out to me. They leaked a document from the defense headquarters. It was like a secret document detailing attack instructions for the Nigerian military to actually carry out an act of war against Niger. And my first instinct was, this must not be allowed to happen. My thinking wasn't even the wider picture. I was just thinking about the possibility of creating a war in West Africa, that under no circumstances must that be allowed to happen. So I leaked it, right? I put it up on Twitter. It got like 5 million views. Everyone saw it, and it became a whole thing. And then the president was then forced to officially deny it because he had tried to do this without getting Senate approval, which was another thing. Why is this guy so desperate to invade a foreign country without even getting Senate approval? What is going on here? And then, because at the time, as a result of this work that I had been doing, I had already been forced to leave Nigeria, like since 2020. I was in Ghana at the time. And then the Nigerian intelligence agency actually tried to abduct me from Ghana. Fortunately, someone within the system, because sometimes you have friends that you don't realize you have. Someone within the system actually sort of gave me information. Like, I literally had a few hours to spare to get the hell out, and I couldn't even board a flight because I didn't know whether there was someone at the airport who was monitoring things. So I literally left where I was. I left the country by road, and I ended up in Nairobi because I went by road to Togo, and then from there I flew from Lomé to Addis, and Addis to Nairobi. And it was in Nairobi that I guess my entire frame of reality broke, because that was when I kind of understood that, okay, so those Pan-Africanist people that I used to clown on Twitter, those guys were actually right about how the world works and what is going on in the world. I used to think, oh my God, these guys are always talking about Amilcar Cabral and Kwame Nkrumah. These guys are stuck in the 60s. Africa is not that place anymore. We have agency now. Everything is down to what we choose to do, blah, blah, blah. And I'm watching all of this happen around me, and I'm realizing, first of all, whether or not Nigerians voted or didn't vote in 2023 made no difference to who was going to become the president.
Nope.
I'm realizing that no amount of investigative journalism I did was ever going to have any effect on whether that guy was going to take office or not. I'm realizing that the decision to invade Niger wasn't even taken by that guy. It wasn't his decision. That was the decision that was made in France and in the US. And I'm realizing that these international institutions and all these things that I've always thought of as the safety rails on which the world works, these things don't really work the way I thought they did. They definitely don't work for the good of Africans. And basically, these, whatever socialists, communists, Marxists, Pan-Africanist people that I just absolutely used to have the most scorn for, that actually these people were not just right, these people were spot on. These people were absolutely correct about everything, and I was just completely wrong. And it was kind of like a very painful realization to make, because at that point, you consider yourself to be a successful mid-career professional. You have a large professional reputation. You've won awards. We're a very relatively well-known person. And in the space of like 1 week, your entire frame of reality just completely cracks. And then you suffer this extremely humiliating ego death, because then you realize that everything you think you know, you don't know. So from 2023, there was kind of like a 180 shift. So the last time I did one of those long read investigative blockbuster pieces that I became popular for was in 2023. I haven't done any since then, because I realized that the real issues that lead to real long-term sustainable change in Africa are not issues of local, like corruption. Like, those are important, don't get me wrong. But there are much, much bigger geopolitical issues that feed into these local issues. And that's where the problem is actually coming from. And unfortunately, the entire media ecosystem in Nigeria and across Africa, which is almost entirely Western funded, is funded specifically to ignore that. It's funded in a way that your mind is meant to be small. You're only supposed to, if you're in Rwanda, you're only supposed to know what's happening in Rwanda. You're not even supposed to know what's happening next door in Uganda. If you're in Nigeria, you're not supposed to know what's happening in Niger. You're only supposed to have this very narrow picture on the world and this very narrow idea of reality and how the world works. And I realized that the only way for this situation to change is, one, Africans as a collective have to do it. Africans cannot do it in silos. They can't do it as Nigeria or as Ghana or as Kenya. It has to be a collective thing. And secondly, for that collective consciousness to happen, there needs to be a media effort, a media ecosystem or a media platform that will arise that is very unapologetically Pan-African in its outlook, and that very unapologetically seeks to create that specific outcome. And that's how I ended up working for African Stream, because African Stream was that platform at the time. It was kind of very fortunate.
Yeah, we had Ahmed came on a platform I should talk about that. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah. So that was 2023, and so which is why I said I used to be an investigative journalist. Now I'm a journalist. That's just the way I describe myself. But I'm other things, but I'm mainly just a journalist. But my focus in journalism has completely shifted to what it was 3 or 4 years ago. I am almost entirely focused now on Pan-African issues, because those are actually the existential issues that are facing us.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks for that long introduction, boy. It kind of puts things in perspective. So for me, because like you're talking about the mindset shift, and this is basically one of the biggest challenges facing most Africans, because you think you've educated, you think you know all these things, and then it just dawns on you that you've been basically literally been missing. Because it's happened to me. That's why I'm consciously where I am, knowing that. And obviously, you hear me. I was born in the UK, grew up in the UK, so I basically lived in the belly of the beast for so long that I know how bad and brutal they are. So I understand. And when I see what's going on in Nigeria today, in Africa collectively today, you see what they're doing. It's just blatantly so obvious. But majority of people cannot see this.
I have no idea.
They have no idea. So I want you to, this is not the topic, but based on what you just said, can you just speak to the topic of what Africans, the miseducated Africans, basically, what can you say to them?
Well, I guess the most important thing to understand about why we are where we are is that the historical enemy, the colonizers, whatever name you used to call them, have been very thorough in their way of subverting not just our economies but our entire frame of reality, our cultures, our existence as we know it. They've been very, very thorough. There was a conversation I had with a Kenyan academic called Dr. Wandia Njoya a few weeks ago, where we analyzed that when Africans or other indigenous groups of people around the world think of war, we think of war as a specific event that happens at one point in time. So when we think of war, we're thinking of 1939 to 1945. That was one single event. But in the colonizer mindset, there is no such thing as peace. War is everlasting. War is everything, right? Sometimes it's a shooting war, sometimes it's not, but everything is war. And that's a mindset that is not indigenous to us. So we have really struggled with understanding that for 500 years and counting. So when we hear that we're at war with the global north, what we are thinking of is guns and bombs and tanks. What we are not thinking of is Netflix and football and food, right? Everything is war, right? The medicines that you put in your body, the medical training that the doctors receive, the vaccines, even the type of seeds that you're going to be allowed to plant, everything is a vector of Western warfare. Everything, nothing is off limits. Religion is a vector of Western warfare, right? So, but because we are not people who think of the world in such ways, we are naturally peaceful people. We are naturally people who believe that the world is big enough for everybody and that there is enough abundance in the world to satisfy everybody. So we are people who operate from a mindset of abundance. We're up against the people who operate from a mindset of permanent scarcity. And that's why they win. Because
and
sorry, go ahead.
Quickly, just to add to your points that you can carry from it, they did have that scarcity. They experienced it during the Ice Age. So it's not something that they've made up. They actually experienced that scarcity. We never did. So go on, brother. Go.
Yeah. So that I think is the basic reason why we really struggle with understanding the sheer difference in reality between ourselves and those that we're up against. And that's why we lose. That's why we've been losing for 500 years. And that's why, even though things are, some would say, not as bad as they used to be, that's why we're still losing, because we still struggle to understand just how bad this mindset is and just how extensive and far reaching it is. Right. So, but if there's anything that I could, I mean, I'm not in any position to sort of, I'm not some spiritual leader or something, so I can't convince Africans to be a different way. But if I had such power, if I was like some kind of Dalai Lama or something of Africans, what I would tell Africans is that just because you see the world a certain way does not mean that other people see the world through the same eyes that you see it. Two people are capable of looking at the exact same object and seeing two completely different pictures, even scientifically. So you cannot be paranoid enough when you're dealing with people who come from, as I like to say, people who come from a place where the ground freezes solid 6 months every year. You come from a place where if you're eating a fruit and you spit out a seed and you come back 3 weeks later, it would have germinated.
It's growing. Yeah.
Right? So you come from completely different planets and you understand the world in completely different ways. You are looking at the world and what you want from it is basically just your self-actualization. You want the basic human needs, you want companionship, you want joy, music, laughter. They look at the world and they have successfully categorized the world into a series of Microsoft Excel entries. Right? Everything in the world is priced and quantified. Right? There's a financial value on the amount of oxygen that exists in the world. There's a financial value for it. I don't know what the purpose of that financial value is, but it exists. There's a financial value for all the platinum that exists in South Africa. Again, what is the meaningful purpose of such a financial value? Nobody knows, but it exists. And that value is captured in some stock price somewhere, which is priced into some ETF basket, which is traded on some stock exchange somewhere. It's all meaningless, but it has very, very real implications for us. So I just wish that Africans understood just how much danger that we are in by not understanding that we see the world through completely different eyes to the people that we have been up against for 500 years and counting.
You know what, David, what you just said there basically, so it speaks volume. And this is basically the work that we've been doing. This is basically why we do what we do. Basically to just awaken Africans, to make Africans see that the Muzungu are evil. I'll say it blatantly. They've been evil for the moment they met us. They've been evil the moment they came into Africa. They've been doing this for a long time. And they're never going to change. And the sooner and better that we realize and confront what we're dealing with and look inwards and unite amongst ourselves. Africans, you're going to keep struggling. Yeah. And that's a fact. So if you're watching this, guys, we do this for a reason. For you to, something to just trigger in your mind to make you say, you know what, we need to do something different, because we do. Okay.
But also,
yeah, go on.
Brother Hundeyin, you saying that they have valuation, like they have value systems for the oxygen in the world, they have value systems for the water, they have like money amounts for everything, that's not meaningless. In a capitalist world, it's not meaningless. That means that they have been sitting and trying to figure out how they're going to monetize that. This joke that we keep saying, soon we're going to be paying for the air we breathe, is actually true.
It's happening.
Right? That's why they don't care about polluting, because if they pollute, then they can provide the solution and make money out of it. And you have to sit back and think, now actually I'm even having a more, and I'm sure it's in Urugu because I haven't finished reading the book. I'm sure this is there. I'm having now an even deeper insight to who these people are. They're short-sighted. They think, like, we see them doing things that are long-sighted as far as greed and taking over and all that. But as far as humanity and their own well-being and the well-being of humanity,
Yeah.
short-sighted. Their arrogance is very short-sighted. Like, they don't look beyond making money. And to me, that is a very uncivilized mindset. I don't know what you have to say about that.
I completely agree. I mean, so I will readily confess I used to be that guy who, I mean, if you check some of my older Business Day columns, for example, I used to write columns for a Nigerian business publication called Business Day. I actually had the most read column in Nigeria at a point, and I was a free market advocate. I was one of those people. Everything will go well with you if you just apply the laws of capitalism. Capitalism fixes everything. If there's anything that is in the government hands, afuera. I was that guy. When the new Argentinian president came in and he was talking about how he's going to slash the government, afuera, afuera. I was that guy in Nigeria. All right. So anything regarding any kind of government, including education, just take it out of government hands, put it in the hands of the private sector, foreign investors, and everything will be a-okay, because that's what I was indoctrinated with. Right. That's all I was ever taught growing up. And then sort of getting older and interacting with the world in different ways to the sort of cocoon that I was raised in, and then realizing that when you successfully financialize everything, you successfully industrialize things that are not necessarily meant to be industrialized, and you successfully create this super capitalist structure that governs absolutely everything. It never stops. There's no adult in the room that says, okay, that's enough. There's no safety rail at the end that says, okay, this is the limit. No, it just keeps going, right? So if you eat up all the oxygen and everybody dies, and then we have to all become anaerobic organisms, the capitalism won't stop. It will find a way to start eating up the carbon dioxide as well. It's an animal that just never stops eating until it eats its own tail and dies.
That's a
That's
great
what
way
I
to describe it.
Yeah, that's what I didn't understand. And that's what we're not taught, right? Because, as I'm sure it will not surprise you to know, many of us who grew up on the continent were indoctrinated with an even fiercer form of this free market
It's
fundamentalism
worst.
than
It's
you.
worst. Yeah.
That's my life.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So this was all we knew growing up. I remember when I was studying for my A levels. Um, I studied A level economics, which I was very proud to tell people that I got an A in.
Of course.
But at the time, not thinking back, there supposedly were supposed to be modules where we were supposed to be taught about the different kinds of economic systems. And the truth is that we were never taught the different kinds of economic systems. What we were taught was that communism is basically this system where 20 people are sharing a room and everybody's poor and miserable and dirty. That's basically what we were taught, right? Meanwhile, the market system, capitalism, is this amazing thing where everybody's wealthy like the USA. So the solution to all your problems is to become like the USA. I was 17 at the time, and those were some of like the most crucial years. That was what was being rammed into my head. So, obviously that's what I put down in the exam, and I got an A. And I was very happy. I'm very proud of the fact that I got an A, Cambridge A-level economics. This is apparently how you run an economy. So when I started writing my Business Day column, close to a decade later, I remember at the time there was this conversation in Nigeria around whether certain things should be imported or whether there should be a push for import substitution. Now, putting aside the insincerity of the government, because import substitution was never really something they were serious about, but there was a conversation about it, and I was firmly on the side of those people who said import substitution is a terrible idea. It's a Marxist idea from the 1970s. It's been discredited. That in the actual economists who understand how economies work know that there's something called comparative advantage. And what comparative advantage means is that what you are good at doing, you continue doing it. So if what you are good at producing is raw materials, you continue producing that. And then you can use the US dollars to import someone else's excess production. And that's global trade, right? And then 2020 happened, and then the COVID lockdown happened. And I started seeing these global trade hegemons furiously onshoring production, right? So then I realized the global economy there is no such thing as a global economy after all. When push comes to shove, everyone is all about themselves and their own, and then your standard of living is then directly dependent on the available industrial base in your country. And if you don't have that industrial base, you're going to starve, or you're going to go, suffer. You're not going to have these comforts. And that was when sort of that frame of reality I had started cracking incrementally, because up until that point, all we had ever been taught is that this narrow frame. For example, when it comes to how should a government be run, there's this thing called democracy. And democracy is not the dictionary definition of democracy. No, democracy is this thing called a multi-party election, which is governed by this thing called an electoral umpire, which is also governed by this thing called the Western NGO and Western Election Observer. This very specific set of circumstances, that is what you call democracy. And anything outside of that is communism and authoritarianism and dictatorship and so
It's so funny. It's so funny you said democracy, because in my questions, I have a question that I wanted you to talk about democracy. And I was like, nah, let me not ask him that. He's not gonna. And here you are talking about it, the phoniness of it. And please, if you can say more. And I'm glad you talked about, because not many people in the world outside the United States, and even in the United States, understand the Electoral Commission and what it does to disrupt democracy. And the idea, like that entity by itself completely destroys the meaning. It doesn't mean like what it says in the dictionary. It is not every man's vote counts. No. So speak to that, please.
I mean, so I think I refer to this as the colonization of language, where even the meaning of words is completely distorted because one group of people using propaganda has aggressively infused this inference into what you think a word means versus what it actually means. Because for the longest time, I thought that democracy was synonymous with one man, one vote, multi-party elections. Meanwhile, the dictionary definition of democracy says no such thing, right? According to the dictionary definition of democracy, you could successfully argue that China is a democracy, very successfully, right? Because the dictionary definition of democracy is a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. So you could argue that the Chinese Communist Party, which is the entity that controls the Chinese state, the Chinese government, is an institution comprised that is taken from the people, it is of the people, and it's governed by the people and it governs for the people. You could argue that successfully. You could also argue that the American political system is a dictatorship. You could argue that successfully. You could say, well, is it a government of the people? No, it's a government of wealthy corporate interests. They literally have legal decisions. I think it's called Citizens United, where their corporate entities actually have legal personhood and are able to contribute unlimited amounts to political campaigns.
And just for those who don't know, Citizens United was a big case that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that yes, organizations can be considered people, and therefore that gives them more legal right to argue human rights, right? Rights of a human. But go on.
Yeah. So you could argue that in that case, the person who actually wields power in the US is not the electorate, but it's the owner of capital. It's the person with the money, which is the corporate interest. But again, when you are educated in our typical African education system, which is basically a 1950s Western education system, you're not even allowed to think in a way that allows you to even access those parameters. You are just trained to think within a very narrow bandwidth of thought. And then very crucially, your ego is just consistently buffed at every turn. such that by the time you turn 21, you have become an unteachable person because you are convinced that you know everything, right? This is very deliberate, right? And I see this a lot in Nigeria. I mean, I'm sure Oladile would know because he's from a Nigerian background himself. Nigerians
Yep.
already culturally already, we have an issue with being very,
Ego,
overconfident.
ego, and ignorance.
Exactly. So that just further amplifies it because you are taught in school that if you scored 10 out of 10 in the test, or if you came first in your class, somehow that makes you special, right? And you are treated specially. And when you've had that treatment all your life, because I was, what you would call a smart kid, right? I wasn't necessarily the one getting all the A's and stuff, but I was getting my B's because I couldn't be bothered to study, right? I was that kid who I never studied, I never bothered in school, but I used to get solid B's, sometimes C's, and I used to win competitions and awards and stuff. So I was so full of myself, so absolutely full of myself that I went to university in the UK. I studied a journalism program in the UK. So it was the Creative Writing and Media Culture and Society at the University of Hull. And bear in mind, this was supposed to be a supposedly left-leaning humanities course where you're supposedly being taught to deconstruct things and whatnot. And really, it wasn't. It's really just a reinforcement of this idea that you are smart and that you know something. Meanwhile, you know absolutely nothing at all. So I came out of there, and eventually I came back to Nigeria with these same ideas in my head. I was all fired up with this idea that somehow what Nigeria and what Africa needs to break out of the ruts that it was in is just aggressive privatization of everything. And, I had this super capitalist window on the world, and, free markets and multi-party democracy is going to fix everything, all the problems with Africa. So if you had have asked me in 2018, why is Uganda the way it is? I would have given you a very silly and simplistic answer. I would have said it's because Museveni is a tyrant, he's a dictator. Very simplistic, very, something that just rolls off the tongue. That what they need is they need a political change, and if you'd ask me who represents that political change, and I've probably given you an answer like Bobby Wine. Right? Because that was the extent of what I thought I knew at the time. But again, as you get older, and I guess if you're lucky enough to have the opportunity to travel, which not a lot of people do, and if you're also, I guess, if you allow yourself to experience ego death, which again is not a thing that many people are able to.
Key. I love that word key. That's very important because a lot of people are so ignorantly oblivious to the truth. But like you said, they would just keep talking a lot of crap. Even though I hear them all the time. I hear them all the time just talking crap. And they would say authentically like they know what they're talking about. And carry on, David.
Yeah, so I guess what has I'm not going to talk as if I'm like some sort of finished product or whatnot, because I mean I still don't know what I don't know.
No, but you're identifying, right? Because you're
yeah.
The reason why I'm not coming in as much is because you're saying what I usually say, right? I am also realizing that we have to get rid of ego. We have to get rid of shame. The thing is not to let it control us. We're not there yet, but we have realized this is the thing that is holding us back. You and I are not completely masters of it, but we're saying join us in attempting to get this thing out of controlling us. But go on.
Exactly. And that's a very difficult thing to do for full-grown adults.
Yeah.
I remember saying a few weeks ago, because I'm hoping to have a kid soon. And I remember thinking to myself that in this corner of West Africa that I'm in, where can this kid get an education that is going to be like the polar opposite of the education that I got? And I actually went on Twitter and I had a back and forth, and I realized that such a place doesn't actually exist, and we have to create
Abibi to me, look out for Abibi to me. You're in Ghana, look out for Badele Kambon. Look out for him. Talk to him. Yeah.
And I realized we basically have to create one because it doesn't really exist yet.
Yep.
And why that is important is because I think it's when people at that age that I think they're the most receptive to new information and to knowledge. They can be shaped the right way. I think we have to accept to a certain extent that the global north has been very successful at shaping us.
Oh, massively, man.
They've been very,
Massively,
they've
massively.
been very successful at shaping
Oh,
our, not just our societies in like a material sense, but even the way we see ourselves.
everything.
I was talking to Dr. Enjoya the other day, and I realized something very, something that kind of made me feel very bad. I realized that some of the ethnic descriptors that we use for ourselves in Nigeria, so you hear that there's a Yoruba people, there's an Igbo people, those are colonial constructs.
They are.
There was no
They
such
are.
thing,
They are.
right? So the idea that there's this group of people stretching from the border of Lagos up onto like Benin and they call themselves Yoruba, that's a fiction. It's not true. Or there's this other group of people called Igbo. That's also not true. But these people have been so successful at penetrating our societies that they've actually managed to shape how we think of ourselves. To the point where I remember when the first time I realized that even the word Yoruba, which I mean, I was raised to think of myself as part of the Yoruba ethnic group, right? And I realized one day that the word doesn't have a meaning in the language. It's an exonym, right? It literally doesn't come from the group that it purports to describe. It's an exonym, right? So some British colonial officer in 18 something had this brilliant idea to take this word and use it to brand millions of people. And then all these generations later, we have people fighting and killing themselves over an artificial identity that a white guy gave to them. That's very upsetting, right? But if you're 35, like I'm 35 now, if you're 35 and you've never come across this information before, and someone tells you this for the first time, how likely are you to not, to not completely crash out at the person and call the person an idiot? It's not very likely. So, which is why I think that the only chance of success that we really have is to capture the next generation and to shape them in the way that we want them to be shaped. Because currently, I say this as someone who comes from what you would consider to be fairly well-to-do background in Nigeria, right? The so-called elite this is not just in Nigeria, this is an African phenomenon.
Yes.
The so-called elites, the education that they give to their kids is a colonial education, bar none, 100%, right? I was lucky enough, so I was one of those kids who, because my parents were very, very sort of obsessed with giving us the best education. I went to some of the schools that have this sort of international standing in Nigeria, schools where you pay the fees in foreign currency, those kinds of schools, right? And I realized that when I look back on my former schoolmates, like when we have like get-togethers, 10-year reunion, 20-year reunions, I realized that if there was a cohort of maybe 50 graduating students, maybe there's like 10 left in the country. Everyone else is a high achiever, but they're a high achiever on another continent. And I realized that this is not just because they were fleeing a depressed economy back home. This is because the education itself was shaping us to do precisely that.
Exactly.
Right? So, and I don't mean this in a metaphorical sense. I mean this in a very, very literal sense.
It's a fact. There is a fact.
Yeah.
You're saying it exactly how it is. Yeah, it is.
So I went to a school called Grange, for example. Grange it's a British school which started off as a colonial school. When it started off, actually, Black people weren't allowed to attend Grange School. I think it was from 1959 or so that it was opened up to the locals. It used to be only for the children of colonial officers, right? It was that kind of school. So I went to Grange, and I think back now, and I remember because we ran the British syllabus, and I remember in year 9, we were writing the key stage examinations and we were studying history, what they said was history. And the subject history, bear in mind, I'm growing up in Lagos, largest Black city in the world, right? 17 million Black people, right? Largest city in Africa. And we learned nothing about Nigerian history, nothing about African history, nothing about the global African diaspora, nothing. What we were taught as history was British World War I and World War II history. So I can rattle off any number of facts to you about trench foot and the dreadnoughts and the Battle of the Somme. I can rattle off these things off the top of my head because I got an A in history. But it wasn't my history. So I graduated from high school and had no idea where I came from. Right? I had this incredible identity crisis because that's what I was trained to have. So obviously, after finishing from there, your parents are pretty well to do in that part of the world. What's the next logical thing? They're going to send you off to university in the UK or in the US or in Canada or in Australia or somewhere in mainland Europe. And that's the end. You're never going to come back. Right? So the fact that I even came back was kind of like an accident almost. But for the vast majority, you're lost to the country forever. And then even if you do come back by accident, you basically just end up repeating the cycle. So you never actually train an elite class to actually take control of their society and take control of their narrative. You just train colonial droids to just continue perpetuating a system that they don't really understand, right? Because I didn't understand the system. I think my teachers didn't understand it either. I don't think most people understand. My parents certainly didn't understand it. All they knew was that this is a good school, that all the high society people want to send their kids to. It's like a status symbol to send your child here. And it costs an arm and a leg, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice to send you there. So you better get good grades. And when you get your good grades, that's it. Everyone is happy. And the wider purpose of what an education is completely lost. That was certainly my experience. So, I know that such efforts exist in Kenya. I've seen a couple. We actually did a story on one when I was at African Stream. But on this part of the continent, we're kind of like behind. So that's one of the projects I have for the coming 2 to 3 years, that we need to create this thing, because currently
we need to link up. We need to link up because we're trying to create something back in Nigeria. Because I'm coming back to Nigeria as well. I'm going back on the ground. So
the one in Kenya was co-opted. So
yeah, it's been co-opted.
Really?
Anyway, so yeah. Because they have the baccalaureate kind of syllabus.
They connected with Europe. Yep.
No.
And we tried to stop them, but nah.
Yeah,
they
came on our platform. We're still friends with them. So yeah, but yeah, that's what's happened.
Man.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that,
Yeah. They came on our platform, and we've been following them, and we saw what's going on. So, yeah.
And I mean, just as we mentioned them, it's important to say, like, have nothing to do with the Mzungu if you're trying to do something African. Just have nothing to do with them, because this is what they do. They detour you from, like, how the hell are you saying I'm an African school grounded on African ways when you're now bringing partnership and joining a Western, like, why? And then we try to tell you and you don't get it.
Yeah. Sadly, we get co-opted. So, and this is the challenge facing Africa, because we would do so well, but the tentacles of capitalism always.
It's that thing. It's that thing again of not understanding how everything is war.
And our need for easy solutions, that, like, our hesitance to struggle, our fear of struggle, because to build a good African thing in this situation, you're gonna struggle.
It's hard. Yeah,
you gotta work hard.
So they're being given an easy solution, and they were like, oh.
Okay. You know what? Where we are is actually brilliant, because it's about decolonizing the mind anyway. So, yeah, brilliant. So, yeah, because what we talk about most of the time, it kind of fits in perfectly. But let's go to the topic, though.
Yes, thank you.
Venezuela.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on Venezuela, and what do you think? How do you, obviously, I know what you're going to say anyway, but how do you think this fits in for people who don't know? Because Africans, as always, miseducated, indoctrinated. Obviously, Nigeria got bombed the other day, and I saw Nigerians, clapping their hands and welcoming Trump, and I was angry. I saw Venezuela, I was angry. Nigeria, I was angry. But this is to Africans mainly. Please speak to, what do you see in Venezuela? What do you see in Africa? How do you see this? Because for me personally, my thought is this is detrimental to Africa. Okay, please, David, your thoughts.
So the first thing it does is that it creates precedent. Because really what this is, let's not mince words, this is colonization. This is not neo-colonization, this is colonization in a very direct way, right? This has been, if you like, the dream of the usual suspects for the past few decades. So I spent a lot of time in the UK, and it was a normal thing you would hear expressed in popular culture that, oh, this was what lost Britain the empire. This was how we lost our empire, right? when we used to run an empire, when we used to run the world. This is a very common, uh, what's the word, sentiment that is expressed. So you could tell that for the longest time, there's been that desire to, get past the era of neocolonialism and having to go through the World Bank and IMF and all these, slow institutions, and get back to, as Eric Prince put it, wearing their imperial hat.
Direct colonialism, yep.
And that's what this is. I suspect that the reason why Donald Trump is making all of this, is making such a spectacle out of all of this, and he's being so particular about being in your face about it. He's putting out statements talking about how we're going to sell Venezuelan oil for America's benefits, and his vice president is going on Fox News and saying we can't let a country like Venezuela have access to the world's largest oil reserves and not be in the control of the United States. They're going to the UN and saying that openly, that we can't let countries not aligned with the United States have access to the world's largest energy reserves. I think the reason they're being so public about it is that they're conditioning our minds to accept this as a new normal. So if this can be done in Venezuela, which is still within the Western Hemisphere under the so-called Monroe Doctrine, I guess what a lot of people also miss out is that the Monroe Doctrine doesn't preclude Africa. It says Western Hemisphere, but it doesn't, there's no borderline where Africa is excluded from that definition of the Monroe Doctrine, right? The Monroe Doctrine only specifies that the Western Hemisphere is the dominion of the US, but it doesn't specify where that definition of Western Hemisphere ends. Because by some definitions, you could say that the coast of West Africa is part of that, Monroe Doctrine, which would place Nigeria squarely in the crosshairs. Now, as I've tried to analyze previously, to very little effect in Nigeria, given the very unique kind of people that we are, West Africa offers a very unique value proposition to the US at this point in time. So the primary reason for wanting a foothold in West Africa, apart from obviously wanting to counter the rise of the AES, wanting to regain control of those three countries, potentially hand them back to France. Obviously, we know that that is a very, very big factor in all of this. But apart from that, the Sahelian West Africa is one of the world's most resource-stacked areas, specifically the resources that are all the rage now. Rare earth minerals and lithium, which are all the rage because they are basically ubiquitous in every kind of electronic or military application going forward. So anyone who controls the global supply of rare earth minerals is basically going to be the world's military hegemon, or at least that's the calculation that has been made in Washington. Now, China made a strategic move last year. It restricted exports of refined rare earth minerals to the US. And as you know, basically China controls something like 90% of the world's supply of refined rare earth minerals. So that was when you then had people in Trump's administration coming out and saying that they want to build out their own rare earth mineral supply chain in 2 years. 2 years is very optimistic. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen. But the point is, of all the places on the planet that have these minerals in sufficient concentration, where can they be found where that isn't under the direct control of a major geopolitical player already? The only place in the world that satisfies those parameters is Sahelian West Africa, which includes like almost half of Nigeria, by the way. Right, so that includes the Sahelian Alliance, that includes Nigeria, that includes Chad, that includes Eritrea. The entire Sahel belt is, flooded with those things. So if you're trying to get a foothold in Sahelian West Africa, and you have to assume that the Sahelian Alliance has aligned itself with Russia, so you can't walk into those countries because there's a security partnership with Russia, except you want to start a world war and fight against Russia directly. What is the next best thing? Where is the next best play? The next best play is what other parts of Sahel and West Africa are there for the taking, maybe places that are currently aligned with you. So Benin, it's aligned, but it's more under the French. Cote d'Ivoire, it's aligned, but it's more under the French. Liberia, Sierra Leone, they're not Sahelian. Mauritania, Arab French. Senegal, French. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Russia. What country is left? Nigeria, obviously.
Niger. Wow.
Nigeria is the only country left, right? So it's Anglophone, it's aligned with the US. It's more than just aligned with the US, it's basically ruled by the US, it's ruled by US puppets, right? The real president of Nigeria is the US Secretary of State, right? It's not Bola Tinubu, right?
Yeah.
The Secretary of State is Nigeria's president, the Vice President is the US ambassador to Nigeria. Bola Tinubu is like the country regional manager or something.
It's like mission manager, gatekeeper, yeah.
Exactly.
Great way to describe it. Yep.
He's middle management, basically. So that is what the interest in Nigeria is primarily about. Now, at this point, I also have to take some responsibility here because in my previous life, again, in that I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was doing investigative work. I thought I was, documenting evils that are being done to innocent people, and I'm trying to change the world, and without really understanding how the world worked. Mm-hmm. I kind of contributed to this problem because the pretext that is being used for this obvious colonial incursion into West Africa via Nigeria now is that there's a genocide against Christians, or that there's specifically targeted violence against Christians. Now, to be clear, there has been a lot of violence across the middle belt and the north of Nigeria, like a lot of it over the past decade. Tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people have died. Yeah. But the thing is, that's half of the country. Overall, the population split is overwhelmingly Muslim, right? If you add together the middle belt and the north, the population split is overwhelmingly Muslim, right? The majority of the people who have actually died in this violence have actually been Muslim. But mischievous people who have been trying to push this narrative for coming up to a decade now laid certain things in place. And unfortunately, I was part of that effort without realizing what I was a part of, because in 2019, I was approached by someone I used to have a lot of respect for. His name is Dr. Richard Ikebe. He ran an NGO called PSJ. PSJ is short for the International Project for Peace Building and Social Justice.
CIA entity, go on.
It's a British NGO. I didn't understand any of this then. All I knew is, this is a very well respected Nigerian, he used to be a journalist in the same generation of the likes of Dele Giwa, the Masebus and whatnot. So these were like my heroes growing up, because when I was growing up, the idea of journalism that I had was that these are daredevils who went head to head with military dictatorships. They went head to head with Ibrahim Babangida. Oh my God, these guys are, they're larger than life. So you can imagine in 2019, I'm 29, I'm an investigative journalist, I'm writing a successful column, I'm trying to build my professional reputation, and then I get a call from this guy with his gray hair, and I show up in his office, and I'm looking at this guy that I only used to see on pages of the newspapers, right? And I'm so starstruck, right? And he tells me that he's reading my work, he loves my work, and he wants me to be part of a team that is working on a research project. And I said, yeah, sure, absolutely, 100%. And this research project was to document violence in Nigeria's middle belt, right? Or at least that's what I thought it was. So we actually traveled a couple of times. Like I traveled to Kaduna, so we documented attacks in Kajuru, in southern Kaduna, and some other places, right? I saw some things that I really wish I hadn't seen, some really, really gratuitous, after effects of gratuitous violence. I've seen a child's corpse before. Anyway, so when that report was done, there was a second NGO involved in this. It was called the International Committee on Nigeria, which is also a UK NGO. Now, when this report was put together, it was called the Silent Slaughter, Genocide in Nigeria and Implications for the International Community. This report was presented in 2020 to the then US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and then US Vice President, Mike Pence. And at the time, so if you recall, it shortly before Trump left office, early 2021, one of the very last decisions that Mike Pompeo took was to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern. Right, that was a direct result of that report, which I worked on. Right, so I was at the time, I was very, very proud of myself because I thought I had done something good. I thought I had documented evidence of attacks against innocent people, and the Nigerian government is being, at the time, I remember thinking to myself, isn't it weird though that they are being designated as a country of particular concern for violation of religious freedom? That this report wasn't about religious freedom, was it? This report was about violence against innocent people. Why are they designating Nigeria? Why is it not designation on a different kind of list? Why is it this list specific? I didn't understand. Again, these people plan these things out years in advance, right? And you will just be a pawn that is being used, and you have no idea the wider context of what you are being used to do. So obviously, Anthony Blinken came in and took Nigeria off that list, and then Trump comes back, and then this narrative comes back in full force. That report is sort of brought back to the forefront of public consciousness, and then data from that report is then being pushed out. And then it was last year actually that the light bulb went, like the penny dropped, and I realized that the purpose of that report was not to document violence against innocent people, and that the purpose of that report was to create a narrative framework for claiming that there's a genocide against a specific group of people in Nigeria. So, for example, in that report, you will never see it stated that in addition to this attack, there was this other attack where 85 Muslims died. The report basically just cherry-picked stuff. So the villages that are known to be populated by Christians, where attacks took place, those were the things that were documented. And the villages where the populations are Muslim, those ones were not documented. And then in addition to this, the cherry-picked documentation, there was also the fact that due to the difference in customs, obviously between Christians and Muslims, when Muslims are killed, the burial is immediate, right? Based on Muslim traditions, I think they have to bury them before sundown. Whereas Christians are the ones who are then going to take bodies to the morgue, they're going to get death certificates and all that. So we went to these local government areas and we got death certificate records, right? So based on those death certificate records, you will see David, you will see Anthony, you will see Timothy, you will see Thomas, you will see Joseph. So if you're looking at those things, all you are seeing is dead Christians. And you're getting the idea that someone is exterminating Christians. Meanwhile, all the Muslims that died are not being documented. And that was intentional. I didn't realize this then, that basically what I thought was my awesome research that is being recognized by this hero of mine, I was being used as a geopolitical tool to frame up Nigeria. And that's exactly what happened, right? Because this report, which, to be clear, like, I feel absolutely ashamed to have taken part in this report. Now, knowing what I know now and understanding as I do now that report was completely cherry-picked. The data gathering practices in that report they did not meet global best standards at all, right? The report was slanted from day one. It had an agenda from day one. And thinking back on some of the conversations that I had with this guy, it's clear from day one that his whole thing was Muslims are killing Christians. So we want to create a report that shows that Islamic terrorists are killing Christians. That's the goal of what we are setting out to do. And that report, unfortunately, has formed the theoretical basis, or basically the basis for all that is being done now. So when you're seeing those incredible numbers being thrown out, that 7,000 Christians are being slaughtered those numbers were taken from that report, right? So that was partially by doing, right? So this is what I mean when I say that when you are not geopolitically aware and when you are not well educated about how the world really works, everything you think you know, you don't know. And you think you're playing, you think you're involved in one sport, and you think you're involved in one game, and you're involved in different sport altogether, and you have no idea. And that's what is happening to Nigeria now. So hopefully, I mean, hope is not a strategy, but hopefully, depending on how the Russian or the Chinese calculation goes, rolling into Nigeria is not going to be that easy because obviously, as you may or may not know, China has a very, very, very strong interest.
Massive.
Yeah, China has massive interest in Nigeria. I will also say this. I'm not going to tell you how I know this. So you're just going to have to take it from me. I can't tell you how I know this, but it's also the case that a lot of China's interests in Nigeria are being deliberately targeted.
So you are still an investigative journalist, protecting your source. But go on. Go on.
A lot of China's economic interests in Nigeria are being deliberately targeted. And when I say targeted, I'm not just talking about terrorists coming in to target them. I'm also talking about the US government trying to lean on its Nigerian representative, Bola Tinubu, to basically expropriate Chinese-built stuff in Nigeria and then privatize it, i.e., give it to US corporations, right? This is actually an idea that is in the pipeline. This didn't start under Trump, by the way. This was started under Biden, but Trump is an accelerationist, and it's a thing that is starting to become more of a thing. And apparently the Chinese are not happy about this. So if you recall, when this noise about potential airstrikes in Nigeria first became a thing, the Chinese foreign ministry actually put out a statement, which basically bought Nigeria some time, in my opinion. And in my opinion, maybe the reason why we're not already talking about like mass casualties in Nigeria, because the so-called airstrikes that took place in Nigeria, they basically bombed a bunch of, cabbage patches.
Yeah.
And, there aren't any known casualties. They basically just carried out a statement. They didn't really do anything. I suspect that the Chinese involvement is the reason why we're still having this conversation, and it's not worse than it currently is. And I hope that that calculation holds, because again, I really hate being in a situation where the continued stability of the country you call home depends on whether another country on the other side of the planet decides to save you or not. We really ideally should not be in this situation, but that's the situation that we're in. We're basically sitting ducks right now, geopolitically, and we're almost entirely dependent on whether or not China decides that we are worth the trouble. For now, I think Nigeria is worth the trouble, just by virtue of the sheer size of what it represents to China in Africa, and the fact that if China were to completely lose its leverage in Africa's largest country and Africa's most populous country, that would be a signal that probably would even cause the geopolitical shifts for China. Maybe the Chinese government doesn't want that. But again, this is just me speculating on an internet live stream. I don't have anyone at the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the MSSS, so I don't know. But I think that's what we're witnessing now.
But just to make and just to remind you to go back to Venezuela specifically, right? But just to make it clear, because I saw someone in the chat saying, yes, Perkins has done some good work in the past, but his anti-China stance today is obviously very disturbing. I'm not denying that he may be still working with the entities that he used to work with to push this propaganda. I'm not denying that. But we have to become masters of not being victim to propaganda and seeing things for ourselves. China is not moving for Africa. China is moving for China. China's presence in Africa is not for Africa. It is not to save us from the West. No, it is to save China. And they will do whatever it takes to save China, even if ditching Africa means that. So whatever saves China is what they'll do. So we would be wise to stop sitting around talking about which criminal is better than the other, and realize they're both criminals. And how can we strategically have relationships with one criminal to overcome the other? and then figure out how to get rid of this criminal or to operate with them in certain terms. So I agree with you. There's something going on there with global politics and China being involved and monies that are being protected, and therefore they want to invest, because also Nigeria is a big fabric industry for China. I don't know if you know that China
a
will
huge
down your
market.
fabric industry. Yeah, there's a whole story about that. I'm forgetting the book now, that has been written about how China took over the fabric industry.
It's more than just the fabric industry.
Yeah.
Pretty much every consumer good that you can think of. Previously, it used to be that it will be made in Guangzhou or something and imported to Nigeria. The model now is a bit different and is much more long term. In my opinion, it's a bit more symbiotic as well, but that's up for debate. The model now is build a factory in a free trade zone, like the Lekki Free Trade Zone in Lagos. It's a Chinese-owned factory, but the staff are Nigerian. So theoretically, these are Nigerian products, but the expertise is Chinese. The investment is Chinese. To all intents and purposes, these are Chinese products. But because they're made in Nigeria, they're not subjected to, customs, taxes and levies
and
and whatnot. So,
that they may have,
yeah.
right? And
So
any
this is
actions they may have.
this is everything you can think of. This is clothes. This is shoes. This is bags. This is radios. This is electronics, furniture, all sorts of consumer items. So yeah, they have a very, very big long-term interest in Nigeria, similar to the kind of long-term interest that they have in Ethiopia. So I would be surprised if, I mean, which is not to say that they, as you rightly said, if it came to it, they would obviously cut Nigeria off like that.
Yeah, if it
But
was a
right now,
liability.
exactly. But right now, I don't think it has got to that yet, and I think there's still more upside than downside for them in Nigeria for now, and I think that's why we're still kind of standing. I think that's why we're still having this conversation. But again, in politics, a week can be like a decade, so anything can change. So,
But to also say that the goal here is for Nigeria to realize this leverage it has and to take
yes,
sovereignty and to
exactly.
operate with China from a point of power, not saying, oh, thank God. I wonder, like for Nigeria, because I'm sure the way you're talking is how some of the government people are talking. Like if China leaves us, we're going to be screwed, right? So not to say that, but to say we are in control of this and China is staying. And we're going to make sure China is staying because we're not going to allow the US to mess this situation. You see what I'm saying? So that's where we need to be. That's the problem. We allow ourselves to be taken as children. We allow ourselves to be treated as children. Move here, we move. Go sit there, we go sit. Stand up, we stand up. Come to the get in this bus and attend this conference, and they do that. Go on.
In this instance, because the president of Nigeria is, I mean, this is not the first time Nigeria is having a US puppet as president, but this is the first time Nigeria is having this kind of US puppet as president. So if puppets have percentages of their puppethood, you could say that the most puppet Nigeria has had before, maybe you would put the percentage at like 55-60%. That would have been Ibrahim Babangida. Tinubu is like a solid 85-90.
Tinubu is 100. Tinubu is a sucker of the suckers.
So I mean, even the type of decisions that other puppets have found very, very, very difficult to push through, such as, for example, the decision to remove all fuel and electricity subsidies. These things have been talked about for decades, right? They've been pumping that thing into our news media for decades. Subsidies must be removed. Subsidies are draining government revenues. Subsidies are bad for the economy. You don't subsidize consumption, blah, 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 blah. No other presidents, they talked about doing it. They talked about, they promised it to their Western backers, but none of them actually really followed through on it. Tinubu was the only one. And he didn't just follow through on it. Dele will back me up on this. His first day in office, his inauguration speech, he literally ended his inauguration speech with "Subsidy is gone."
Yeah, straight away. Yeah.
Yeah, that was his kickoff thing. So he's that guy. So
Yeah, the current hardship then started, and that's basically what
Exactly.
picked it up. Yeah,
It started immediately. So
immediately. Yeah,
this guy was given a remit: go into that place, pauperize these people, reduce their spending power, make their economy smaller. Look, if you look at the what's it called, the GDP numbers between 2023 and 2024, have you looked at the numbers for Nigeria? Have you seen the decline? In Tinubu's first year, I think he met Nigeria's economy, I think, at what,
Yeah,
250
Babajide was
billion.
showing us numbers recently. Yeah,
Yeah, it was like 250 billion or something when he met it. In his first year, he took it under 200 billion. No, it was 230 billion, as I recall. He took it under 200 billion. He wiped out $40 billion of GDP in 1 year. Like, this has been the most destructive president I can think of since Ibrahim Babangida. Like, the only other head of state that has been anything close to as destructive as this guy is Ibrahim Babangida, who I'm sure it won't shock you to know was
yeah.
also a
We know.
CIA asset. So
course.
that's kind of the situation that Nigeria is in right now, which is why it's not going to be so easy to do what you've said, which is correct, like taking control, because the person who is in power now, and he's not there by accident. This was lined up many, many, many years in advance. Obviously, we didn't know that at the time. I certainly didn't know that. I didn't understand that this was what I was up against. I thought I was up against a corrupt Nigerian oligarchy. I thought I was up against corrupt Nigerian politicians, and
Yeah.
I had no idea. It's
Corruption is
just
this percentage of the problem of Africa.
exactly. I didn't know that at the time. So that's kind of where we are right now. So we're kind of at the mercy.
We
Sorry,
can't
you're
hear you.
completely muted.
Oladele, we can't hear you. Yeah, go on, brother. Oh, say
We
your
can't hear
piece.
you. Oh
Go on, Hundeyin.
wow.
Go on.
Yeah. So I'll just quickly close with this. That yeah. We whether I guess it's fashionable to say this or not, we're kind of at the mercy of the Chinese right now, in Nigeria
Which
specifically.
is very unfortunate, but you're right.
Um, we really are, because up until 2027, which is the next election,
Mm.
um, 2027, I think, will be the next realistic chance to um, to get any kind of change on board. Because I don't think the sort of revolutionary route, or the military coup route, is going to work in Nigeria. It's just not going to happen.
Mm.
I've interacted extensively with people in and around the Nigerian military, and it's just not, it's just
And the
not a thing.
Nigerian people is the problem, because that's what happened in Burkina Faso. The people pushed for it. The Nigerian people
Yeah.
are so fickle. No, they will not push. They're not pushing for it. They love their fancy cars and their big
So
mansions.
the thing, the thing with that in Nigeria, and I think I was speaking to Marlet. I forgot the name of her channel, but I was speaking to her a few weeks ago about this,
Mhm.
and I said I believe that part of the reason why the revolutionary potential in the Sahel was so much higher than that of Nigeria or Benin is that coastal West African countries have been conditioned by their relative economic comfort to be just completely useless compared to the Sahelian West African countries. I genuinely believe that. I think that in as much as the economic numbers coming out of Nigeria are bloodbath, in as much as Nigerians complain about how there's high inflation and everything is terrible and everybody wants to leave, wants to run away, get a visa, I think that paradoxically, in amidst all of that, I think Nigerians still find life too easy.
Yeah, exactly. They're too comfortable.
Yeah, I think
Exactly.
Nigerians are still too comfortable. I
We
think
still can't hear you, Oladele. Yeah. Go on.
if you grew up in Bobo Dioulasso, some random city in Burkina Faso, or you grew up in Kayes, in Mali,
Mm.
where you have no visual reference for prosperity around you. Everyone you know is poor, has always been poor, has no
Exactly.
prospects in life except poverty. And you can then see that on paper, your country has economic potential, but that economic potential does not benefit anyone except some French corporation.
Mhm.
I guess it's easier for you to connect your situation and the gravity of your situation with the fact that there's an outsider milking you.
Yeah.
But in Nigeria or across coastal West Africa, where no matter how bad the majority of people have it, there are just enough people who are living their absolute best lives. They're just enough. So if there are 200 million Nigerians, for the sake of argument, and 190 million of them are eating sand, right? There's still that 10 million people who are living as if they're in Miami. And those are the 10 million people that you get to see. Those are the ones who live in Lagos and in Abuja. Those are the ones who drive those nice cars on those nice roads. Those are the ones who get to play around in those new trains that keep popping up all over the place, right?
Yeah.
So if you go on YouTube and you type in Nigeria, Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Nigeria does not look like a terrible place at all. Simple reason being that because of the sheer number of people and the sheer size of the population, and the fact that it's coastal and it has a strategic location, just by the accident of geography, there's a floor to how poor Nigeria can be. There's a floor. Like Nigeria can be very poor, but it can never be poorer than a certain extent. So because of that, and because there's always going to be that guaranteed level of visible prosperity for people to see and aspire to around them, I think that is what reduces their revolutionary potential, because I think revolutionary potential is heightened in a situation where the experience is uniform. The experience in Nigeria is extremely siloed, right? So I can use myself as an example here. I was born in Lagos. I lived in Lagos for the first 17 years of my life. And the experience that I had as someone that was born and raised in Lagos probably has nothing in common with the experience that someone born and raised 3 kilometers away from me in Ojota has. I was raised in a place called Ogudu GRA. GRA is a government reservation area, so those are like the really nice places, right? And my dad obviously was a very senior civil servant. When he retired, he went into private real estate practice. He did very well for himself. So we had a massive house. We had an 8-bedroom house. We had at any point in time we had between 4 and 6 cars.
You were doing good.
Yeah, we lived, la vida loca, as you would call it. But 3 kilometers away. So if you go outside the estate gate and drive 3 kilometers down the road to Ojota, it's a completely different universe.
It's crazy,
right? That's where you see that African poverty porn, right? It exists. It's there.
Yeah.
But I'm 3 kilometers away, living in a rooftop mansion, and those people are 3 kilometers away. Our experiences do not intersect. We speak differently. We have different accents, and we grew up 3 kilometers away from each other.
Yeah.
That's the kind of place Nigeria is. So in that kind of place, having sufficient convergence for there to be mass revolution is very difficult, which is where the media then comes in, because the role of the media in such an environment is to create a monoculture. Because revolutions are much easier to happen when there is a monoculture. But because we now live in a time where it's harder than ever to create monocultures because of social media and algorithms, right? Because I'll explain what I mean by this. So when there was a TV and there was a radio, and at any given point in time you had a limited set number of options of media that you could consume, that was when monoculture was a thing. Everybody was listening to the same song at the same time because the only place you could listen to it was on the radio. Everybody was watching the same thing at the same time because the only place you could watch it was on the TV. So you could go to school the next day and everybody has listened to the same thing and has watched the same thing. You go to work the next day and by the water cooler, everyone's discussing the same thing they watched on the same TV station last night. Nowadays, that opportunity for monoculture has, what I just described is called a monoculture, right? It's a singular culture. Now, there's Netflix. So there's no reason for all of you to watch the same thing at the same time. There's Spotify, there's Boomplay, there's Audiomack. There's no reason for all of you to listen to the same radio station. There's podcasts. So you don't need to consume the same political content. You can consume, everything is customized for you. And the people doing the customization, the algorithms doing the customization are proprietary algorithms, which means that they're somebody's property and you're not legally allowed to know how they work, right? They're black boxes. You're not allowed to open them up and figure out, how does this algorithm select for me the stuff that I get to see and watch and interact with. So basically, some guy in San Francisco is building customized intellectual prisons for each of us.
Imagine that.
Wow.
So we are being targeted especially in West Africa, or in Africa as a whole. We're being targeted especially. We did a story about this at the Spearhead recently, where we did some rudimentary analysis and we're able to figure out that as an African using social media, like maybe you're like a geopolitical commentator or a journalist or someone who talks about serious stuff on social media, you are less likely to be seen by an African. You're an African in Africa. You are less likely to be seen by a large African audience, regardless of how many followers you have. You are less likely to be seen by a large African audience than a US or European creator doing the same things. So if I am discussing geopolitics from an African perspective, I have 1.2 million followers on Twitter, right? And I'm trying to have a conversation with my following. Some guy with 60,000 followers in Texas has greater reach in Africa than I do. In Africa. So some guys from elsewhere are getting to determine our individual monocultures for us. And they're doing this using these proprietary algorithms that we have no control over.
But we kind of do, because Africans can follow our channels to make them that big and so that they can be seen more than that. Like, we kind of do. Well, if we understand the systems, we kind of do.
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that if you fully understand that you are at war and someone is trying to brainwash you, then yes, you absolutely can pick and choose and be very deliberate about your media consumption choices. Most people don't understand that we're at war. Most people are just swiping randomly, right? And what they think are random swipes and what they think is just infinite scroll and it's a benevolent algorithm is actually something that came out of somebody's Department of War. And its goal. So what we were able to establish at the Spearhead was that the content that we are most commonly fed by these algorithms in Africa primarily is entertainment, primarily, right? So it's not even so much as trying to brainwash us with their own political content or whatever. It's just they want to fill your head with fluff, with cotton wool, make you dumb, right? That's the best way for you to be. And unfortunately, because again, we're not in control of our governments. If we had control of our governments, one of the first things any government should do, say the Nigerian Communications Commission or something, or the Ministry of Information or Communication, they should be able to go to these American tech platforms and say, for you to operate in Nigeria, we need to have local storage and control of data. We need to know how your algorithms work. Exactly how the US did to TikTok. TikTok had to create a whole new app specifically for the US. Right? Because they understand that it is war. They understand that data sovereignty is war. We don't. And that's why we're having this conversation. So again, it feels like I feel like I've stumbled into an oasis in the desert. The fact that I've been able to have this conversation with two Africans that look like me and actually understand the stuff I'm talking about, because these are things I talk about all day, every day, and it just feels like I'm yelling into the void. Nobody understands what the hell I'm talking about.
That feeling is mutual. Have you been seeing the smile on my face? It's almost like I'm fanning on you. But besides the point right now, going back to so that we do not fail our audience, right? So they've captured Maduro, they've invaded Venezuela. They're talking about, and this is a repeat, right? Panama. You just like I'm reading confessions of an economic hitman as I listen to news. They're accusing him of drug trafficking and narco-terrorism charges, and now they are prosecuting.
Which they dropped.
Right? They're prosecuting him in the United States. And then there's a story apparently coming out that Marco Rubio has a friend who has wanted access to Chevron, the oil company, and he may get access to that company. So let's talk about Venezuela and what is actually going on, and the propaganda they are putting out, and how people can detect what is being actually. Go on, brother. Before I say what I have to say, you give us your thoughts.
Well, first of all, the narrative that Maduro was being arrested for drug trafficking or whatever, they've already kind of dropped it. They've already admitted that the
Pushed that anyway,
so-called
because it wasn't substantial.
yeah,
Anyway, so.
the so-called cartel de los soles is not just a non-existent thing; it's a thing that they created. So I guess if that had gone to court, it wouldn't not only have exonerated him, but it would have raised, it would have given a second life to certain stories that some people would rather prefer to
and
remain
outside of our view, there might be some sittings that they're having where his legal team is like, bullshit, bring this and we'll tear you down, and they're like, oh, okay, we're gonna drop this.
No, so the so-called cartel de los soles, I don't know if you're aware of this. This was actually CIA creation, and this is actually according to the CIA itself.
Yes.
Right. So one thing I've noticed that they're excellent at doing is hiding stuff in plain sight. So there is a plethora of material in the public domain showing that CIA is probably the world's largest drug trafficking organization.
Absolutely.
It has had extensive involvement in Latin American and Asian drug trafficking. There's so much of it, but because a lot of this material which was the result of the work of the so-called Church Committee in the 1980s, and then was later put into print format by the journalist Gary Webb, who was later murdered. A lot of this is just, it was just like an academic paper. There's like a 1,000-page dump of this thing. So to most people, that means absolutely nothing, because most people are not going to sit down and read this stuff. Most people need to be spoon-fed. I know this because I used to be in that line of work where my job was to read the 1,000-page legal deposition, extract information from it, and turn it into a readable format that people would actually want to read. That's what made me popular in the first place. That's why my long-read investigations were so popular, because I was that guy who knew how to take a 49-page legal document and turn it into a crime thriller. Right, that was my whole thing. That was my gimmick, if you like. I was the guy that knew how to write journalism in a way that made it look like fiction, and everybody loved it, right? But the thing is, people didn't love it necessarily because they were gaining knowledge. They loved it because it read well, because it was thrilling, and because there was the added thrill of knowing that this is nonfiction. So for most people in this audience, it was pretty much entertainment, as I came to find out to my disappointment. So these guys have already figured this out, decades, maybe centuries ago, that people just fundamentally do not like to read. And if you put paragraphs and pages in front of them, it's as good as hiding it from them. So I think what they were worried about was that this so-called cartel de los soles thing, if it went to court, would have given a second life to this story, which has come out before and which no one really paid much attention to. That's something they're very good at doing. When they want to hide something that they've done, they release it quietly into some nondescript, they'll declassify documents and they'll declassify 13,000 documents at once. So except you know what you're looking for, you have no idea about the significance of what has been declassified. They do this all the time.
Information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the so-called Kissinger report, for example, is a very good example of this. The Kissinger report is one of the most evil documents ever created by humankind.
I posted that on Substack, actually.
We should have that conversation, and maybe you can come back for that. We should have specifically that conversation. Yeah, go on.
And they literally just buried it in a whole trove of stuff that they declassified in the 80s, and nobody really came to understand the significance of what this thing is. That this is a eugenics program, basically. Mm-hmm. This is a report stating that the so-called global South needs to be starved of the ability to grow its population so that it will not use its resources for itself, because the US needs those resources more than that. The global people in the global South should stop having babies so that the US can use the resources that were meant for those babies, right? If you tell people this, that the US government said this in the year 1976. It was under Henry Kissinger. It was under this, and they will just look at you like, who is this conspiracy
Which
theorist?
goes to show the pushing of GMO, the pushing of LGBTQI. You bring that up, people are attacking you.
Again, because people lack context, and if you tell them that this context exists, they're like, why the hell would such a thing exist? If it existed, why the hell would they declassify it? Why would you have access to CIA? I've been told before, why would you have access to CIA documents? I'm like, you can literally Google these things. Like, it's a lie.
They all need to read. Honestly, like now, all jokes aside, like even like they all need to read Urugu. I honestly think we all need to read. Like, let's get the extreme, the farthest description of these people, who they are. Have that understanding and then start walking. Because we need to see plainly what Mama Marimba Ani has called these people and described who they are and what they've done and why she thinks they are Urugu.
I agree.
So with regard to going back to Maduro, I think that again the primary purpose of all of this was, as I described it to Marlet, psychological terrorism.
Yeah.
They're creating a new psychological normal for you. This is what Trump has done since he came back into office. He has basically set about reframing what normal looks like. So all the stuff he does that people think, oh, this is an idiot, or this is an uncouth person, or he's not intelligent, that's completely wide of the mark. It's completely intentional. Everything is done to. There's a concept in politics called the Overton window, which I'm sure that you're familiar with.
No, I'm not.
So the Overton window. So in there's this idea that there's a narrow frame of topics that are considered politically acceptable for people to speak about publicly. That narrow frame is called the Overton window. So the goal of Donald Trump is to widen the Overton window, and which he has been very successful at doing. 3 years ago, you couldn't really, it wasn't really a fashionable thing for you to come out and say that you think Somalis are animals.
Yeah.
You can do that now.
Yeah.
And you get 50,000 retweets, and Elon Musk will boost your posts, and you get 30 million views. Yeah. You couldn't 3 years ago. You couldn't say let's say before Elon Musk took over Twitter, for example. You couldn't go and make it your whole thing to just constantly racially insult black people.
Do you know there's a couple of white men who have put out a video talking about lynching black people? Like literally there's a video, a song that's out.
Yeah, I saw it. And it was never taken down. No. Three years ago, that would have gotten you banned so fast. Not because they liked black people, but because the Overton window was smaller then. But the Overton window has been expanded now. The purpose of expanding the Overton window, similar to what Adolf Hitler did when he became chancellor in Germany, is to make it acceptable to do things that people previously have found abhorrent. So Germany, I hate using Germany as a frame of reference in conversations like this because, again, it feels very Eurocentric to me. Like we're constantly referencing some.
No, but Germany learned how to see Germany through the United States. You can do that so that you don't absolve them. They literally studied the US and replicated, but go on.
So how what people consider to be regular, ordinary salt of the earth people moved from being that to being collaborators with people who allegedly killed 6 million Jews and, watch them starve to death in work camps and all that. How that happened, there was a process of moving from A to B. It didn't happen overnight. So that process of morphing is called widening the Overton window. And that's what Trump is doing very successfully. So now, for example, apparently it's okay for the so-called ICE in the US to shoot and kill US citizens.
Yeah, they did that yesterday.
It's okay now. If you do it now, you get defended.
It's crazy.
Right? And the victim is getting called a domestic terrorist.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's
right.
crazy.
That's not by accident.
That's crazy.
Right. Soon it will get to the point where if they can do that to US citizens, then eventually, it's going to get to Black Americans, almost
Yes.
inevitably.
Yes.
It's almost inevitable. And once it gets to them,
Wow.
because really, they're like, once it gets to them, they're like the ultimate target. Then it's open season on everybody, including us on the continent. Right.
People don't
So
understand that's the precedent that's being set. Yeah.
I think that's what the primary purpose, apart from obviously the colonial intentions of Venezuelan oil or whatnot. To be honest, I don't really think Venezuelan oil really made that much of a difference. The US is the world's largest oil producer anyway. They produce more oil than Saudi Arabia. So Venezuela might have had the largest oil reserves in the world, but Venezuela wasn't even producing that much oil, and Venezuela's oil industry was sanctioned to hell and back. So Venezuela's oil production wasn't making a difference to the US. For them, I think it's more about the statement of intent. This is the new normal.
You know what, David? Because David, I've been reading. So you're talking about Venezuela. Could that be they're trying to get to Colombia and Cuba
In Brazil, someone said.
and Brazil?
That's exactly
Cuba,
that's
because
exactly that's
Brazil is the
exactly where
ultimate target.
that's exactly where I'm heading with this. That
Thank
the
you.
precedent is being set that I can waltz into your country, I can carry out a decapitation strike, because that's what that was. They didn't kill him, but to all intents and purposes, it was a decapitation strike. They took out the government or the head of government. That has been done in Venezuela, which was like the most anti-US country in that hemisphere, maybe with the exception of Cuba. So if that can be done there, that means that it can be done in Colombia. He has already started firing threats at the president of Colombia, telling him to watch his back. Yeah. Again, that language is not by accident. No. Because you would think to yourself, if he's going to do it, well, then why is he threatening him? Why is he talking about it? The point is to create that psychological atmosphere inside your head that this is now normal. This is now okay. Right? And it is working. Because people are no longer talking about, at least, well, the African audiences that I interact with, are not really talking about the fact that this is completely illegal by any definition of the so-called international law that exists. Nobody's really talking about that. Everyone has the conversation has shifted to, okay, but what did they do to provoke the US that much?
Exactly.
So it's no longer a thing of the US is not allowed to do this. It's now, how can I adjust myself in line with this new colonial US reality?
Wow.
It's working. Once this tsunami sweeps across South America, I think it will.
Yeah.
I think it will.
They said they're going to do it. So I believe they're going to do it.
I don't think there's anything that is really going to stop them. I don't think the Chinese and the Russians are going to put their skin in the game in that way. They will send over, like the Russians sent, air defense systems to Venezuela. And the Venezuelans clearly decided not to use them, and they clearly sold material out, clearly. So I don't think that the Chinese and the Russians are, for example, going to put troops on the ground or something.
And that was strategic as well. Russia is no dummy. They knew what time those people were arriving. The fact that they came late, that's strategic on their part, so that they're not getting too messy with what's going on. That's strategic. They know they have intelligence to tell them when these people are coming. So the fact that they came in late, that's not their mistake.
I mean, even before that, they had already sent in a whole bunch of equipment, and the Venezuelans, for whatever reason, clearly decided that they were better off giving up Maduro than putting up a fight. Because you cannot tell me that helicopters, which are relatively slow-moving vehicles, went from offshore all the way into a country, 100 and something kilometers, no anti-aircraft missiles shot at them, nothing. They were able to go in, take out a president, right? Because for context, taking out the president of Togo is not an easy task. Taking out the president of Venezuela, which is one of the most heavily armed and resourced countries in that part of the world, it's not an easy proposition at all. And they took out this president. By the way, when the country is under attack like that, the president is supposed to be in a bunker. And the Venezuelan president has a bunker, a nuclear-capable bunker built by the Russians. And they claim they found him in his bedroom, and come on, bullshit. He was given up, right? So I think the Chinese and the Russians know that, well, at the end of the day, you can only fight for people who are willing to fight for themselves.
Exactly. And in fact, Cuba, Che Guevara says that when he's trying to and realizes that the not willing to fight for themselves. He's like, we're going back home because these people are not willing to fight for themselves, right? But also specify when you talk about Venezuelans that it's the elite. The masses are not on the same page with the elite Venezuelans.
Absolutely. And I'll go further than just saying the elite. It's the European and Europeanized elite.
Yes.
The
Right,
Muzungu.
because there is always that, like, that train is never late.
Thank you.
Right. So the black, brown, indigenous people, generally speaking, tend to understand why the Chavista revolution needed to happen in the first place. While the you know who's, they're all about, oh, McDonald's, oh, US investment, oh, this, that, and the other. The so-called Nobel Peace Prize recipients, that Machado lady, went on TV saying that US corporations are going to make an unbelievable amount of money
Yeah, I saw that.
from Venezuela. I can't imagine
I saw that.
claiming to love your country, and your idea of loving your country is going on TV and saying, hey, my country is this huge cake, and you are going to enjoy eating this cake so much.
Imagine that.
You know? But again, the reason they would do that is the same reason why the same population of people in South Africa or wherever else they are behave the same way, which is that when you are not indigenous to a land and you feel no real connection to the land, all it is to you is just an opportunity for exploitation, nothing more.
Pause on that. Pause on that, because that right there is the importance of what I always say. If we are truly seeking liberation, we must get the invaders out. The white people on the continent must be removed, and future interactions with them must be strategic and intentional. It is plain and simple like that. You can call me a racist, call me all kinds of names. That is a fact. One day you will realize it. But go on, brother.
Yeah, so I mean, you can't fail to see that exact same pattern of behavior, whether it's in Argentina, whether it's in Venezuela, whether it's in Colombia, in Brazil, South Africa, in Bolivia, in Ecuador. It's the exact same group of people doing the exact same thing, and coincidentally, they always seem to support Israel, which is obviously like that's like it's like the how do I put it? It's like the litmus test, the colonizer litmus test.
Uh-huh.
Do you support Israel or not?
How do you identify a coon? Or colonizer?
It's like the litmus test, basically. So, yes, I think this tsunami is going to sweep across South America. I don't think anything's really going to stop it there. I think that Africa is more of like a contested ground, which is either a good thing or a terrible thing. Good thing in the sense that we're not lost to them yet. Terrible in the sense that could make us decide for a war.
Yeah.
So, what that will then require from us, which I think some African countries, I'm going to especially shout out Ghana here, even though obviously, Ghana is not at the same level as like the AES or whatnot, but within the current constraints that it has, I think Ghana is doing an excellent job of keeping West Africa relatively stable for now. The John Mahama administration specifically has found out a way. I'm not sure how they've done it, but they found out a way to maintain excellent relations with both the Sahelians and Nigeria. So they have excellent relationships with both. So basically, the entire stability of West Africa is dependent on Ghana right now. Without Ghana, there will probably be a war happening right now in West Africa. And if that war were to be happening, you know that it would be a NATO versus Russia war, which would make West Africa, Ukraine, but 100 times worse.
So let me say something, and then, unless Oladile, you have a question.
No, yeah, finish up, because I got some questions from the audience.
Yeah. Let me say something, and then you respond, right? It's not going to be a direct question. So for me, the way I see us coming out on top is we must stop following their laws. We cannot abide by their laws. So democracy has to get out of the window.
I agree.
Terrorists and who they are has to get out of the window. Everything that they describe is illegal for us is legal. Like, we have to flip the script. Everything they call illegal for us is legal. That's literally, that's liberation.
And Trump is actually, in spite of himself, is providing the perfect pretext for that. Yesterday or 2 days ago, he withdrew the US from 66 international organizations, conventions, and whatnot. This would actually be the perfect time if Africa was geostrategically, on its feet. This would
Okay,
be the
yeah, yeah.
perfect time
That precedent.
to the so-called Pelindaba Treaty, especially. This would be the perfect time to
Wow.
pull out of it. The
And
treaty that
use
states
that
that Africa is
precedent
not allowed to, you know,
and
But
say, hey, the US just pulled out, so it seems like
exactly.
our leaders are not thinking that way, though, are they? They're not thinking. They're not savvy.
Whether they're thinking that way or not is beside the point because they don't have the freedom to act that way.
they
That's the
don't
problem.
have the freedom. It's not how they're thinking, it's the
So
freedom. But the second thing
Wow.
I was going to say about the Overton window, and thank you for introducing us to that. And listen, we learn. All of us are learning. There's
Yeah,
no
that's
one
why
who
that's
knows
why
it
we're here.
all. We're constantly learning from our guests, from the audience, from each other. The Overton window, that they are intentionally expanding it. On the flip side, Africans continue to narrow it. What do I mean by that? So Trump has allowed for us to make videos about lynching, for white men to make videos about lynching. Trump has allowed for people to talk about sleep, like presidents now can sleep with 50 million women, give them whatever, put them on the ceiling, sleep with a 12-year-old, take a video, talk about people's private parts, and still be president and still be revered, right? So
yeah.
that was the beginning of the expanding of the Overton window, and Americans allowed it. But on the other side, we Africans are not, because when you're in a room telling Africans what must be done, they shut you down. They want that window very narrow. They don't realize that it's the Overton window they're working with. But for Africans, you can't say kill.
Of course.
They'll tell you that. A black person will correct you and say, Duko, you can't say kill. Stop it. I was in a meeting. They all acted like, what did you just say? I'm not kidding.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
So
Yeah.
these
I've been in
people
plenty of
who,
rooms like that.
right? These people who are our enemies are expanding the window and saying all kinds of shit. Let's recolonize Africa. And it's just a viral video. Did you see what he said? Did you say? And we forget. But we cannot get on screen and say all white people in Africa must leave.
Well, that's why
Other black people are like, Nuko, you can't say that. That's discrimination.
that's why platforms like this are important, and that's why what we do at the Spearhead is basically we are not asking for permission to introduce certain topics or to shift the Overton window in certain
No.
places. That's why we even chose the name, the Spearhead. It's a very warlike name. It's deliberate, right? We are unapologetic. We are saying so. If this set of people is free to carry out all kinds of psychological and physical violence against us for 500 years, we are free to say absolutely whatever the hell we want in return. That's our ethos, right? And we have no apologies for it. There's no there's no editorial which is not to say that where we don't have a policy for stuff that we can and can't say.
Mhm.
However, those are just sort of self-imposed suggestions more than guidelines per se, because we understand, and this was something that I understood in my previous iteration as the journalist that I used to be, even though this was on a much smaller level, but I understood then that if you're trying to tell the story of something nasty and something disgusting and something terrible,
Mhm.
and you want to tell that story truthfully, you
Mhm.
can't tell it in a way that makes the audience feel comfortable.
Do you see what
Yeah.
I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? Like, you had the training for that. I'm doing it just from understanding and thankfully having a brain that can get that. No, I'm sorry. It's just I like sometimes we criticize people from being bold and realizing who they are and their capabilities. I have that capability to just understand shit and be able to say it, because to me it makes sense. You literally were trained that that was the way to go about it. Just say the damn thing. And Africans are busy trying to say to each other, Nduku, you can't say that. That doesn't bring a good energy. We must bring good energy to the audience. You can't do that to your people. It needs to be
No,
peaceful.
no, no, no,
Have a good
no.
voice, Nduku. Your voice is very agitating.
In fact, our so in my before I started up the Spearhead, when I was editor-in-chief at West Africa Weekly, our house style guide had a line that said, "If the truth will kill them, let them die." That's my whole thing.
Yo, I love you. I really, really love you and appreciate you.
Oladile, we cannot hear you. Like, I don't know if you muted yourself.
I don't know what he keeps doing to himself. I don't know what he keeps doing. We heard you before. So let's just go to the audience questions. He'll come in and say what he needs to say. All right. How do you see the military operations in Nigeria last week? I didn't even know about this. Is he talking about the Christmas attack?
I would imagine so.
Mehari Dereje, just expand on that question and we'll come back to it. The next one, let me put it up. Oladile, did you want to say something before we go to the questions?
No, I put the questions there. I've started the questions up. Can you see them?
Yeah, we moved on from the first one because we need more clarity.
Okay.
And then we're on the second one. So go on, take over.
Okay, the second question there is are we talking about okay, he's talking about the let me quit the question.
He did explain the bottom, yeah.
Okay, there you go. The AFCTA initiatives are taking so long to operate and bear economic fruit. If AFCTA doesn't get going, Africa is dependent of basically you talk about the AFCTA. Is it for me, this is my opinion.
The brother was talking about it before.
AFCTA basically is co-opted.
It's not for Africans.
It's co-opted. It's African Union. African Union is co-opted. So basically, these institutions are not doing the bidding of Africans at the moment because basically, don't forget the African Union, AFCTA, is basically majority funded by the Europeans.
No, it's a US thing. And brother,
they basically fund the institution. So how can an institution that's funded by externally be doing the bidding of Africans? So that's basically why we need something definitely radical. Anyway, David, you want to go and talk about it?
Before Hundeyin speaks on it, it frustrates me when we are doing Odunde and there's an African gathering. So they've come to the US, to Philly. That's where Odunde is done. And we're all in the room talking about African economics and all that. And guess what is being pushed? This very thing, the African free trade. And I'm sitting there like, y'all think this is helping us. I cannot believe it. So Black Americans are like, this is the thing. And I'm seeing my brother saying, please educate them, my brother. Go on.
So for those who don't know, the AU has about 85% of its budget funded by the EU and so-called multilateral organizations. So only about 15% of the AU's budget is internally funded. And of that 15%, the collection rate is only about 86%. So to even get African countries to successfully fund 15% of the AU every year is a struggle, it's a challenge. I know this partly because this is publicly available information, but also partly because I was once part of an initiative that sought to create an AU-funded Pan-African TV, radio, integrated digital media platform. And the reason it didn't happen is simply because there was no money for it. It's not as if there's no money in the AU, but the money that is being donated from the EU and whatever is being donated for specific programs in specific departments for specific purposes. So if you're trying to do anything for expressly Pan-African purposes, so for example, the Pan-African payment processing system, which is something that has been spoken about since 2017, 2016. Why hasn't it been activated yet? On paper, it's not the most complicated thing in the world to get all African financial institutions operating on a single standard that helps them to exchange money so that we can all do business amongst ourselves without necessarily using US dollars and without having, the long delays that are currently inherent. On paper, it's a matter of API integration. The technology exists across Africa. There's no African country that doesn't have a relatively advanced banking system. Why doesn't it exist? It doesn't exist simply because there's no political will for it to exist on the part of the people who actually sign the checks. The EU Currently is the world's largest free trade area, as a result, consequently, is one of the wealthiest places in the world per capita. It is not in the EU's interest, based on the business model of Europe, which is built on cheap extraction from Africa. It is not in the EU's interest for Africa to trade with itself. It is not in the EU's interest for Africa to become a free trade area where Africans are able to move and trade and transact freely and become wealthier. It's simply not, right? Even if the EU was led by, some bleeding heart liberal that calls themselves a leftist or whatever, it wouldn't change because that's simply the economic reality. So the same thing goes for the so-called AU passports, which we've been talking about since 2012. We're in 2026 now. It's been 14 years. We've been talking about an AU passport, and to the best of my knowledge, there are like 3 people that actually have one.
Yeah. Dangote, Wadamaya, and somebody else.
Wadamaya doesn't have one. He wishes he had one, but he wishes he had one, but he doesn't. To the best of my knowledge, the only person that I personally know I've met that has one is a member of the AU Parliament, some high-ranking politician from Tanzania. So you have to be at that level for you to even have such a thing. That should be a basic thing. I should have an AU passport. You should have one. We should all have one. The reason it doesn't exist is because the funding mechanism to put it into production and to harmonize the immigration systems of all 55 African countries simply doesn't exist. So if these institutions are going to become useful and fit for purpose, the obvious thing that needs to be done, well, not obvious, but the only realistic way to make it happen is for Africa to fund the AU by itself. Currently, Africa does not fund the AU. But I personally think there's no reason why Africa cannot fund the AU. But again, these international players, Western players, have been very good at implanting into not just African people, but into African governments and institutions, the idea that somehow you can't function without them. Right? So if you go to an EU Parliament session, you're not going to see Kenyans and Zimbabweans and Nigerians there. Everybody in the room is a white face. The only black faces you see are European black people, like black citizens of European countries.
We have the UAE and Israel.
But at the AU Parliament or at an ECOWAS meeting, you are seeing a sea of white faces everywhere.
Thank you. Say it.
Right. This is not just a thing people say, I have seen this personally. Like if you go to one of those meetings, 50% of the room does not look like you. Right. So already, yes, that's a material reality. So
and half of them are CIA operatives.
So until such a time as Africa is actually able to fund these continental institutions by itself, these things are not going to change, unfortunately.
But David,
and I didn't understand that myself until maybe 2 years ago when I actually started interacting with some of these players. Because previously, me too, I used to ask these questions: why AFCFT? We've been talking about it for so long. What is so hard? Why do our leaders find it so hard to do blah, blah, blah? Nah, our leaders are not the ones doing anything.
In a simple explanation, this policy allows for DHL to operate on the continent at very low cost. Their expenses are minimal, and therefore the prices DHL gives us are very comfortable, and we're using DHL. As a result, increasing the profit margin of DHL. As opposed to a Kenyan entity that I wanted to specifically use because I'm supporting Black people to ship goods from Kenya that could not give me the price I wanted. It was ridiculously expensive because of the expenses that they have. So their profit margin is smaller. That's what this does. This policy, that's what it does. This policy, when Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda come together and they say we have to get rid of the Mtumba I'll call it system for now. I'm forgetting the word. Industry. The Mtumba industry is the second-hand clothing industry in those countries. When they came together and said we need to revive our fabric industry and take out the Mtumba industry, the United States threatened under this threatened to sanction them under this policy.
It actually sanctioned Rwanda.
This policy, yes. Using this very policy that most Black Americans think helps us. the US used it to sanction those three nations because they wanted to revive their fabric industry and get rid of the mtumba, the second-hand clothing industry, which makes affordable, gives access to Kenyans to affordable used clothing. And therefore, Kenyans do not get something like this made by a tailor because to them it's more expensive to do that.
Right.
Okay, David, let's go to the next question because of time. Can you see the next question? What do you think about Shahid Bolson's take on that the Venezuelan abduction was a result of global corporate coalition? Obviously, you talked about that. And another take about preserving the petrodollar. Yeah, I think you've covered that, I think.
Yeah, as I said,
if you want to remind them, you can quickly, yeah.
It's primarily about sending a message about who supposedly is still in charge. Now, you and I know that this empire is on its way out, but empires don't decline in a single day. People often talk about the fall of Rome. I think what people all usually fail to acknowledge that Rome didn't fall in a few days or weeks. It took about 50 years for Rome to properly decline. So people like me have spent a good 18 months now talking about multipolarity, end of unipolarity, end of US empire. The US empire is still going to be very much a thing for the foreseeable future. Maybe not as a unipolar entity, but it's still there and they're still trying to assert themselves. And this is one of the methods of asserting themselves, that in reactivating this so-called Monroe Doctrine, it's a form of psychological terrorism, which is what I describe it as. That, and by the way, when I say the US government, I'm not just referring to the politicians, I'm referring to the corporate interests, because they are part of the US government.
That's the main thing. The corporate interests, basically, they're the hidden hand.
They are the US government.
Yeah.
Right.
But you gave the example of Citizens United. Since then, they've become one and the same thing. Go on.
It's not even since then. It just crystallized it, but it's always been like that. The US has always been a corporation.
Yeah.
Before it's a country. So, but yeah, I guess preserving the petrodollar fits into that same narrative as well. That by reminding the world who is still the boss, and then not just obviously kidnapping Maduro, but also taking possession of these Russian-flagged Venezuelan oil tankers. That's also meant to tell the world that even though you think that there's a multipolar world, we are still the top dogs, and we can actually seize a Russian-flagged vessel and nothing will happen. Right? And the fact that Russia is not responding, and people don't understand why Russia is not responding, is also having that desired effect that people are then thinking, oh, maybe these new upstarts are not as powerful as we thought they were. And the US is still this almighty top dog. And people don't realize that the reason Russia has not responded to that is that, first of all, these shadow fleet oil tankers are very old and very cheap. Typically, you can buy the entire oil tanker for the price of 1 or 2 loads of the stuff that it's carrying. So from the Russian and Venezuelan point of view, these things they're burner devices, they're throwaway. So Russia is not going to start World War III over some rickety 35-year-old vessel that is going to get scrapped next week. Anyway, but people don't understand that. All they see is it's a Russian-flagged vessel, US sees control of it, and there was no pushback from Moscow. So, that means that the US is still the top dog. That's the desired psychological goal. And I guess in that sense, yes, the petrodollar is being protected, at least in the short term. But it's not going to last.
Okay, the final question there. Can David talk a bit about the role of Senegal in ECOWAS, AES, and Sonko's position with regards to France's role in his country?
So I'll be honest enough to say that the internal politics of Senegal are a little bit of a mystery to me. I understand the general sphere of things about the schism between Sonko and Faye. I understand that. What I'm not entirely clear about is the role that Diomaye Faye is playing in terms of what relationship that he actually has with France. Because typically what should have happened by now is either he would have fully aligned himself with Sonko and Senegal would basically be on the verge of joining the AES, or he would have fallen out completely and the merger government between himself and Sonko would have fallen apart. He would have fired Sonko. Then Sonko would have taken taking control of the political formation and started a new party or something. Neither of those things has happened. So it's kind of hard to say for now what Faye's strategy is. I mean, you and I know that Sonko is the real person in power in Senegal, as far as the people are concerned. The people actually voted for Sonko, not Faye.
Yeah.
It's just that Sonko wasn't allowed to be on the ballot box.
Honestly, because of what happened to him, yes.
So it's possible that Faye knows that without Sonko, he doesn't have a government. So if he fires him, that's pretty much the end of his own political journey. It's possible that's the case. I've also heard from some people in the know, again, it's very difficult to verify this information, but I've also heard from some people in the know that the Senegalese military is extremely French aligned, regardless of what was done, regardless of the stunts that were pulled with France supposedly pulling all its military installations out of Senegal and no longer having soldiers stationed permanently in Senegal, that the Senegalese military still maintains all its defense partnerships with France, and that some of the most powerful generals in Senegal are basically on a hair trigger standby alert. That if there's any kind of pro AES move by either of Sonko or Faye, that these guys will carry out a coup to preserve the status quo. Again, it's impossible to verify that, but that's what I've heard from people who are in the know. So make of that what you will.
Okay, thank you very much for that, David. Really, really appreciate your time. You've been very insightful.
There's one last thing, Oladile. Someone mentioned something that it would be nice to hear what Hundeyin has to say about it. There's a story of AU headquarters, and we know this because China was commissioned to build this building in Addis Ababa. So, but speak to it, brother.
So supposedly, I mean, this story has never been officially confirmed or denied, which can mean it's true, which can mean it's false. Nobody knows. But supposedly, shortly after because it was donated by the Chinese government, the AU headquarters. Supposedly after construction, a Tunisian security team supposedly discovered that the building was bugged, and then they had to take 7 or 8 months sweeping through the building to sweep it of bugs. Supposedly, I don't know. My main issue with this whole thing is that I think that the story, whether it's true or not, is a bit of a red herring. Why I say it's a red herring is, first of all, who has by far the most demonstrated history and ability of interfering with African sovereign affairs? It's not China. We know who is actually responsible for that. And secondly, who sits in on all these meetings where the AU diplomats are at? Who has full access, including having observer status, which gives them full access to everything that the AU does everywhere? Who is it? So by focusing on this story about Chinese bugs in the building, you're losing sight of the bigger picture, which is the people who supposedly didn't bug your building don't need to bug it.
Because they're sitting right there. You invited them.
Because they're sitting, you literally invited them. Wow. That's how I see it.
All right, thanks for that. Thank you very much, bro. It's been a while happening, but it finally happened, so we appreciate your time. Just before you go, we have a question. We have a tradition on the podcast where our last guest left a question for you to answer for us, and the question he left was, how would you tackle the mindset of Africans who think you're looking down on them because you're coming from the diaspora?
Oh, that is a tough one.
And you thought you weren't the Dalai Lama for Africa. Now take on the Dalai Lama position and tell us.
That is a tough one. So I'm guessing this question came from someone who is
in a diaspora,
born and raised in the diaspora. No,
I was born and raised in Nigeria, but he came to the UK.
Okay, so someone like him shouldn't have that much of a problem because he's culturally African anyway, so he shouldn't have that much of a problem fitting back in. I was actually thinking more like maybe an African American, or like someone who, or like a Caribbean or something.
No, it's
Those are the
mostly
people.
us, those of us who moved, because this happens in Kenya too. Those of us who moved away from home, we go, we are educated, we learn about, we face the beast
Right,
straight in the eye, and we're coming back to
right,
warn
right,
them, and
right,
they're like,
right.
"What do you know?" Yeah,
Yeah, because we come back to warn them.
yeah.
Right. Okay, now I completely understand the question. And oof. So you see, that is something I myself struggle with as well, because I'm in the exact same boat. And I'm accused of the exact same thing. I'm accused of being condescending. I'm accused of being proud that I think I know better than everybody. I think I know everything. I think I'm always right. And I guess the fact that 95% of the time I am right doesn't help. Really doesn't help. So I guess this will be, if I were to give advice, I'll probably be giving myself this advice as well. And I think this is the only advice that has worked for me, is that if you think that you are helping your fellow Africans, understand that you are helping your kids, right? So Africans, brainwashed or colonized Africans can be very, very difficult people to
Very.
to relate with, to speak with, to be your audience. They are very, very, very difficult people to coexist with, and that's because they have been conditioned to be that way. It has been done very, very deliberately to them. They are victims who don't realize that they are victims. They are victims who actively collaborate with their oppressors because they think that they are in power, and they actually there's a there's a metaphor I like to use, that they are the pieces of meat on a plate who think that they are the guests at the table,
Ooh.
right? So
Wow.
when dealing with them, there needs to be a certain amount of, at least in my experience, a certain amount of emotional detachment, where you accept that there's a good 60 to 70% of you who, quite honestly, are probably going to die anyway. There's nothing I can do about it. But I'm not really going to focus my attention on that which is negative. And I'm going to talk as if all of you have a chance of succeeding and all of you have a chance of waking up. So what I tell myself every day is that I'm going out there and I'm going to scream into the void, and I know that nobody's listening. But on the off chance that there are 2 or 3 people out of 100,000 that do listen and do manage to make something of themselves, something better of themselves, then good. You've all seen that famous quote by Benjamin Borombo where he said, anytime I'm trying to fight for the rights of Africans, I have to use one hand. I use the other hand to fight the Africans themselves. It is what it is. You just have to make do with that reality that your people are never going to see you as the hero who has come back to rescue them or save them from their state of lack of knowledge. They're never going to see it as that. Contrary to what a lot of Westerners feel, Africans are actually extremely egotistical people. Africans are not humble people.
Yeah, we are. And
So
the ego is basically steeped in the misinformation, the indoctrination,
exactly,
basically.
yeah. Especially, I'm sorry to say this, especially Anglophone Africans, because
Oh yeah.
Dr. Njoya actually analyzed this
We the
very
best.
brilliantly. Dr. Njoya analyzed this brilliantly. She analyzed how British anti-intellectualism has basically seeped into the colonial culture of,
You don't speak well.
you know,
Correct that. You did not say that right. No, that's not how we say that. You're not wearing your shirt right. No, 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 no. You sit up. You don't eat like that. No, you don't. That's yeah. You're right.
so not just that the British obsession with being prim and proper, but like there's a very unique strain of anti-intellectualism which is uniquely British, which they refer to as common sense, but which is actually just anti-intellectualism with extra steps. And that basically,
Man.
when they colonized the parts of Africa that they colonized, they inculcated that exact mindset into us, such that instead of theorizing and instead of using the scientific method, the Anglophone African's first response to anything that he comes across is common sense, i.e., to try and make sense of it using his limited frame of reference. So anything that doesn't fit into his limited frame of reference is nonsense.
Wow.
That's the Anglophone Africa.
Wow.
You know how many times I've said that? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense.
Okay. Finally, David, can you please? Thanks for your time. I think it's over 2 hours. A question for our next guest from you, please. What would you like to ask our next guest, please?
Ooh. Well, I don't know who the next guest is. So
Well, yeah, we don't know either. That's how we do it.
Do you know what the next topic is?
No. Just whatever comes up, whatever. This is what we do.
This is African spirituality. Will be guided.
Well, okay, so since I'm working in the media space, I'll ask a question from the media space. And my question would be, at a time when people's ability to consume media is now being compartmentalized by these US and European algorithms, which we don't control, and given that when we're not yet having the conversation about owning our own platforms or whatever, we're still stuck with these Western platforms. With these constraints, how do we sell Africa to Africans in a way that when they do come across it, whenever the algorithm deigns to show them it, that it catches their fancy and it doesn't trigger their colonial reflex, which is to reject it? Because there is a colonial reflex. I mean, we've seen this at Spearhead a lot of the time. We put out a video, for example, there was a video of, I think it was Dr. James Small.
Oh yeah.
Talking about how he said that there has never been a European civilization, that the things that people call European civilizations were always at war from day one to day zero, that's not a civilization. They never created. The entire thing was war, seize from other people, and destroy, right? And the vast majority of our audience obviously is West African, and you could literally see people fighting with this message, like struggling against it. It's like there's this inner European somewhere inside that is telling you, no, reject this. This is heresy. You know, it's almost as if like colonialism is a type of religion.
It
that
is
exercised or something. So
it is.
So how do you tell the African story in a way that bypasses the part of the brain that triggers that colonial rejection reflex?
That's a good.
I guess that would be my question.
I actually like that.
I think it's time to go back to using mushrooms. That's all I'm saying.
All right, David, we thank you for your time, my brother. It's been basically worth the wait. You know, I've been chasing you for a while, man, but thank you for
continually chasing him until you got him. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you very much, man. I appreciate your time, and thank you for the work you're doing, because you're basically doing a massive job out there. I mean, I've seen all the investigations and things you're doing to expose the corruption that's happening in Africa. And we basically need more people like you doing this. And that's why we're here as well. Let's just keep pushing. So thank you very much.
And by the way, Oladile, I'm going to go ahead and say to Brother Hundeyin, notice I'm not even mentioning the name David. David, you'll forgive me for not mentioning the colonial. So anytime you feel like you guys have found out information that you want pushed out, reach out to us.
Please,
so just reach out.
You got my numbers. Just
don't wait for our invitation.
We're basically on the same. We're basically on the same. We're fighting the same fight. Yeah. And anything that's gonna basically waken the people up to actually see the fraud, the evil that's going on, we need to expose it, because the more we get out of, the better.
But I would like to request you to come back for Kissinger report. Go on, Oladile. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So
sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. And guys, thank you for watching. Just please share this video. Let people who are just waking up, let them get a different perspective of what they already know, because we need to waken up people. And we're at that stage now where what got us here is not going to save us, guys. It's time to do something differently. We'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Bye.